Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to comment on the attitude that people have of the Bible as fiction and fairy tales. Now I first want to comment on fairy tales. Now I'm going to actually sort of basically tell a fairy tale right now. I think it's one of Grimm's fairy tales. It's the story of the fisherman and his wife. And I recently saw a wonderful stage play of people doing sort of their own versions of all these different fairy tales. They did like this one sort of very comedic, sort of quick attempt to tell all the versions of Cinderella in 3 minutes. But anyway, their performance of the fisherman's wife was very good, but I'll talk about something when I get to a certain point in the story. But anyway, the story of the fisherman and his wife. There was a fisherman who caught a golden fish who could talk. And the fish said, "I'm a prince that was turned into a fish." And then the fisherman goes back home and his wife says, "You can ask that fish to grant you wishes." So the fisherman goes back, and the wife had asked to have a nicer house and to have more money. And the fisherman asks the fish, and the fish grants him the wish. Then the next day, the wife wishes to be king, and goes back to the fish, or the fisherman goes back to the fish. The fish grants that wish, and the fisherman's wife now is king. And then the fisherman's wife is still not satisfied and wishes to be pope. So the fisherman goes back to the fish, and the fish grants the fisherman's wife that wish, and the fisherman's wife is now pope. But now the fisherman's wife, being probably the most powerful human on earth, is still not satisfied. She sees the sun, wants to control it, and asks the fisherman's wife to be God. And the fisherman goes down to the fish. In the play, the fisherman was just very scared. He just was very reluctant to tell the fish what the wish was, and then says, "My wife wants to be God." And in the play, this is where the fish pauses the story and basically tells the audience the message of the story. And the fish basically says, "Now, I've granted several people all these wishes. They've all asked for things like this. This is not the first time. But none of them," says the fish, "has wished for me to become a prince again. And I'm content just being a fish." And then we get back to the story where the fisherman goes back home to the little cottage, or the little house, and they're poor again. They don't have all this money or wealth, as they were at the beginning. And it's like I'm now getting goosebumps, and I got goosebumps there. It was like I was thinking, well, that's sad in some ways, but at the end they're back to being happy. How they presented the story was she was more and more sort of straight, much less happy, and more greedy, more selfish, more angry, the more and more her desires, her wishes were granted. And that's a fairy tale. This is a story yes, it has all these sort of magical things, but this is a story that really has meaning. Maybe stories like Little Red Riding Hood might not have as much meaning or as much message, but someone can look at it and see some sort of message within that story. Or Sleeping Beauty, which is maybe a story more sort of to escape things in our lives. And a lot of the fairy tales that are in the Bible are basically older stories like that. Some of the stories might have from the authors messages that weren't maybe as good. Some of them had great messages. I mean, some of the stories in the Bible were written to criticize some of the earlier stories in the Bible, like the book of Jonah was basically criticism of a lot of the Jewish ideas. Or I think Amos was very much a criticism. I think Malachi was also sort of commentary on moving Judaism into a new age. And now on fiction. When people tell me the Bible is fiction, I think a way I could respond would maybe be saying, well, what if I told you that The Time Machine by H.G. Wells was fiction? I mean, H.G. Wells was using a story to basically comment on society. I mean, he was talking about the way the future might be headed if English society at the time stays as it was, were to stay as it was. Or Gulliver's Travels was very much a social commentary. And I sometimes look at these stories from maybe 100, 300 years ago, 400 years ago, but still fairly recently. And I think there are a lot of similarities that those authors had to us today. And sometimes when I look at the stories of Jesus, I look at, wow, it's very much like the Pharisees could easily be compared with the Westboro Baptists, in my opinion. And Jesus could be compared with people like Shane Claiborne or Martin Luther King Jr. Although their inspirations were very much Jesus. They preached about following in his footsteps. But anyway, the point of this video is, yes, the stories in the Bible are fiction. Yes, they are fairy tales. And now there's the question of, well, why not just read other fairy tales? Why the Bible? Well, for me, it's because I really like the stories in the Bible. I like how there are some that are maybe not as good. I like how it's a very messy book. It has some ugliness. It also has some great stuff in it. And I want to comment, there are people of other religions who continue to make up their own stories of their own. One of my friends continuously makes up stories about different gods and goddesses. He made up, like, the story of how winter came to Minnesota. But basically my point is, yes, these religious stories are fiction and fairy tales, but they still have meaning. Thank you for watching. Shalom.